A runaway bride crashes a Mafia funeral in a soaking wedding dress, and the cold-eyed heir to the crime empire marries her on the spot to claim his throne. Now trapped between her obsessive ex-fiancé, a dangerous new husband who never smiles, and his seductive younger brother who sees through every lie she tells, Audrey Vale realizes escaping one cage just locked her inside a deadlier one. But the girl who ran barefoot through the rain is about to discover she's stronger than the men trying to own her. If you want to see how far a desperate choice can take you, stay until the end. Hit that like button and drop a comment with your city so I can see how far this story travels. Rain came down like punishment the night Audrey Vale's life split in half. She was 25 years old, barefoot, and running through downtown Providence in a wedding dress that cost more than her childhood home. Mascara bled down her cheeks in black rivers. Her veil caught on a street lamp and tore free, floating away like a ghost she'd never see again. Behind her, Damian Mercer's voice cut through the storm, calling her name with the kind of ownership that made her stomach turn. "Audrey, stop running!" She didn't stop. The dress clung to her legs, heavy with rain and regret. Her feet slapped against wet pavement, and every step felt like pulling free from quicksand. She'd spent 2 years with Damian, 2 years believing he loved her, 2 years convincing herself that his control was protection, that his jealousy meant he cared, that the way he made decisions for her was just him being responsible. 20 minutes ago, she'd walked into the cathedral's back hallway looking for him before the ceremony. She found him pressed against a woman in a red dress, his hand tangled in her hair, his mouth on hers like he was starving. When they pulled apart, the woman laughed, a sharp, cruel sound that echoed off marble walls. "God, Damian, you're really going through with it?" "Of course I am." His voice was casual, dismissive. "Audrey's safe, predictable, easy to control. I can do whatever I want, and she'll never leave." The woman smirked. "Sounds boring." "It is, but boring is useful." Audrey didn't remember making the decision to run. One moment she was frozen in the hallway, and the next she was tearing out the side door into the rain, her bouquet abandoned on the floor like evidence at a crime scene. Now Damian was chasing her, and she didn't have a plan beyond get away. Lightning split the sky. Thunder followed, so close it rattled her ribs. She turned a corner and nearly collided with a wrought iron fence surrounding a massive stone building that looked older than the city itself. Cathedral architecture, Gothic arches, stained glass windows glowing faint gold in the storm. She grabbed the railing and pulled herself up the steps, her dress dragging behind her like an anchor. The heavy wooden doors loomed ahead. She didn't think. She just shoved them open and stumbled inside, gasping for air. The silence hit her first, then the cold, then the realization that she'd made a terrible mistake. The space was enormous, vaulted ceilings, stone pillars, rows of wooden pews packed with people dressed in black. At the front of the room sat a coffin draped in white lilies, and standing beside it was a priest mid-sentence, his mouth hanging open in shock, every head turned toward her. 50, maybe 60 people, all staring. Audrey's breath caught in her throat. Her fingers tightened on the door handle behind her, but her legs wouldn't move. Rain dripped from her dress onto polished marble floors, spreading in a dark pool around her feet. A man in the front row stood slowly. He was older, maybe 60, with silver hair and a suit that probably cost more than Audrey's student loans. His expression was cold, dangerous, the kind of face that had watched people beg and never flinched. "Who the hell are you?" Audrey opened her mouth, but nothing came out. Her heart hammered so hard she could feel it in her throat. Another man rose from the second row. Younger, 30s maybe. Dark hair, sharp jawline, eyes like broken glass. He looked at her the way a wolf looked at wounded prey. "She's nobody," the younger man said. "Throw her out." I'm sorry," Audrey finally managed, her voice shaking. "I didn't know." "You interrupted Antonio Duval's funeral," the older man said, his voice low and lethal. "Do you understand what that means?" The name hit her like ice water. Duval. Everyone in Providence knew that name. The family that controlled the docks, the unions, half the politicians in the state. The family people whispered about in bars and avoided in public. The family that didn't forgive mistakes. Audrey's vision blurred at the edges. She tried to step backward, but her heel caught on her dress, and she stumbled, catching herself against the doorframe. I'm sorry, she said again, louder this time. I'll leave. The doors behind her exploded open. Damien stood in the entrance, soaked and furious, his dress shirt plastered to his chest and his hair dripping into his eyes. He looked past Audrey like she wasn't even there and fixed his gaze on the crowd. She's mine, he said, breathing hard. She's my fiancée, and she's not thinking straight. I'm taking her home. Audrey's stomach turned. No. Audrey. Damien stepped forward, reaching for her. Stop being dramatic. We'll talk about this. Don't touch me. His hand clamped around her wrist anyway, hard enough to bruise. Let go, she said, trying to pull free. You're embarrassing yourself. I said let go. Damien yanked her toward him, and Audrey's heel slipped on the wet floor. She crashed into his chest, and his arm locked around her waist, trapping her. Excuse me, a voice said from somewhere near the altar. But she's not going anywhere. The room went quiet again. Audrey twisted in Damien's grip and saw a man walking toward them through the rows of silent mourners. He moved like smoke, smooth, deliberate, impossible to look away from. Tall, maybe 6'2", dark suit tailored so perfectly it looked like armor. Black hair swept back from a face that was too sharp to be handsome, but too striking to forget. His eyes were pale gray, cold as winter, and when they locked on Audrey, she felt something tighten in her chest. Kael Duval. She recognized him from newspaper photos, charity galas, the occasional scandal that made local news before disappearing, the eldest son, the heir, the man who would inherit everything now that his father was dead. Damien straightened, keeping his arm around Audrey. This doesn't concern you. Kael stopped 3 feet away. Up close, he was even more unsettling. Not because he looked dangerous, though he did, but because he didn't look anything. No anger, no curiosity, just cold, calculated assessment. You're in my father's funeral, Kael said quietly. Everything in this room concerns me. She's my fiancée, Damien repeated, like ownership was an argument. We're leaving. Is that true? Kael asked, his gaze sliding to Audrey. Are you his fiancée? Audrey's throat felt too tight to speak. Damien's fingers dug into her waist, a warning. Yes, Damien answered for her. Now move. Kael tilted his head slightly, studying Audrey with the kind of focus that made her feel like he was peeling back layers she didn't know she had. You're wearing a wedding dress, he said, but no ring. Audrey's left hand was bare. She'd torn the engagement ring off in the car and thrown it out the window, somewhere between the cathedral and wherever the hell she'd ended up. She took it off, Damien said quickly. She's upset. We had a fight. I don't care, Kael interrupted. His eyes never left Audrey's face. I'm asking her. For the first time since she'd crashed through the doors, someone was treating her like she could answer for herself. Audrey swallowed hard, her heart pounding. I'm not his fiancée, she said. Her voice came out steadier than she expected. Not anymore. Damien's grip tightened, and he leaned close to her ear. Audrey, don't. I said no. She shoved at his chest, hard enough that he stumbled back a step. Kael's expression didn't change, but something flickered in his eyes. Interest, maybe, or calculation. He looked at Damien the way someone looked at an insect they were deciding whether to step on. Leave, Kael said. I'm not leaving without her. Yes, you are. 2 men in black suits appeared from the front rows, moving silently to flank Damien on either side. They didn't touch him. They didn't need to. The threat was clear. Damien's jaw tightened. He looked at Audrey, then at Kael, then back at Audrey. You're making a mistake. Get out, Kael said, his voice dropping lower. Before I make you. For a moment, Damien looked like he might argue. Then he seemed to remember where he was, who these people were, what they could do without anyone ever finding a body. He stepped back, hands raised in mock surrender. Fine, he said, but this isn't over, Audrey. He turned and walked out into the rain, and the heavy doors swung shut behind him, cutting off the sound of the storm. Audrey stood frozen in the silence that followed. Her dress dripped onto the floor. Her hands were shaking. Every eye in the room was still on her, and she realized with sudden, crushing clarity that she'd just traded one nightmare for another. Kael turned to face the crowd. Continue, he said simply. The priest cleared his throat and picked up where he'd left off, his voice trembling slightly. The mourners slowly turned back toward the altar, and Audrey was left standing in the aisle in a ruined wedding dress, dripping wet and utterly lost. Kyle looked at her again. "Follow me." It wasn't a question. Audrey hesitated, but the alternative was walking back out into the storm with nowhere to go, and Damien probably waiting in the parking lot. So she followed. Kyle led her through a side door into a narrow hallway lined with dark wood paneling and old portraits. Their footsteps echoed. He didn't look back to see if she was keeping up. He just walked, and she followed, because she didn't know what else to do. They stopped in a small room that might have been an office once. A desk, a chair, bookshelves lining the walls, a single window overlooking the rain-soaked street below. Kyle closed the door and leaned against it, his arms crossed over his chest. He studied her in silence for a long moment, and Audrey forced herself not to look away. "What's your name?" he asked finally. "Audrey Vale." "How old are you?" 25. "And that man outside, Damien, he was your fiancé?" "Yes." "What happened?" Audrey's jaw tightened. "That's none of your business." Cale's mouth almost curved into something that might have been a smile. "You crashed my father's funeral in a wedding dress," he said. "That makes it my business." She didn't answer. She was too tired, too overwhelmed, too angry to play whatever game this was. Cale pushed off the door and walked to the window, his hands in his pockets. "I'm going to ask you a question," he said, his back to her. "And I need you to think carefully before you answer." "What question?" He turned to face her again, and this time there was something new in his expression, something sharp and calculating that made the air in the room feel thinner. "Do you want to go back to him?" "No," Audrey said immediately. "Why not?" "Because I deserve better than someone who thinks I'm too weak to leave." Cale's eyes narrowed slightly, like he was recalibrating something in his head. "What if I told you I could give you better?" Audrey frowned. "What?" "I need a wife," Kyle said, his voice calm and businesslike, like he was negotiating a contract. "My father's death leaves the family vulnerable. The people who worked with him need to see stability. They need to see control. A wife does that. A public marriage shows strength." Audrey stared at him. "You're insane." "I'm practical. You don't even know me." "I know you walked away from a man who tried to own you," Kyle said. "I know you're angry enough to crash a funeral in front of 60 armed criminals without flinching. And I know you're smart enough to realize you don't have anywhere else to go." Audrey's breath caught. He wasn't wrong. She didn't have anywhere to go. Her apartment was in Damien's name. Her car was at the cathedral. Her job was at his father's law firm. She'd built her entire life around him, and now it was gone. "What do you get out of this?" she asked carefully. "Control," Cale said simply. "My younger brother Lucien thinks he should inherit instead of me. A wife makes my claim stronger. You help me secure my position, and I give you a life where no one controls you again." "That's not how marriage works." "It's exactly how marriage works in my world." Audrey shook her head, stepping back toward the door. "This is crazy. I'm leaving." "Where will you go?" She froze, her hand on the doorknob. "Back to Damien?" Kyle asked quietly. "Back to the man who called you predictable and easy to control? Or maybe a hotel? If you have money, which I'm guessing you don't, since he probably controlled the accounts." Audrey's fingers tightened on the doorknob. She hated that he was right. She hated that she'd been so stupid, so trusting, so completely dependent on someone who saw her as a possession. "I'll figure it out," she said, but her voice sounded hollow, even to her own ears. Cale crossed the room in 3 long strides and stopped just behind her, close enough that she could feel the heat of him through her wet dress. He didn't touch her. He didn't need to. "You walked into this building looking for shelter," he said quietly. "Let me give it to you." "Why?" Audrey turned to face him, her back against the door. "Why me? You could marry anyone." "Because you're already here," Cale said. "And because you're angry. Angry people don't ask questions. They take what they need and survive." Audrey searched his face, trying to find the lie, the manipulation, the trap. But all she saw was cold calculation and something else, something that looked almost like recognition. "What do you want from me?" she asked. "Loyalty," Kyle said. "Play the role, wear my name, help me secure control of this family. In return, you get protection, money, and freedom from the man who tried to break you. And if I say no? Kale stepped back, giving her space. Then you walk out that door, and I never see you again. But we both know Damien is waiting outside. And we both know he won't let you go easily. Audrey's chest tightened. She thought of Damien's hand on her wrist, his voice in her ear, the way he'd looked at that woman in the red dress like Audrey was just an obstacle to work around. She thought of the apartment she couldn't go back to, the job she'd have to quit, the life she'd have to rebuild from nothing. And she thought of Kael Duval, cold, dangerous, offering her a deal that sounded too good to be true because it probably was. If I do this, she said slowly, I want control over my own life. No one tells me where to go, what to wear, who to talk to. Agreed. And if I want out, I walk away. No threats, no consequences. Kael's jaw tightened, but he nodded. Agreed. Audrey took a shaky breath. This was insane. This was reckless. This was the kind of decision that would follow her for the rest of her life. But staying with Damien or running back to him because she had nowhere else to go would destroy her. Okay, she said. I'll do it. Kael's expression didn't change, but something in his eyes sharpened. Good. He pulled out his phone and made a call, speaking in low, clipped tones. Audrey couldn't hear what he was saying, but within 5 minutes, 2 people appeared in the doorway. A woman in her 50s with kind eyes, and a man in a dark suit carrying a leather briefcase. This is Father Marcus, Kael said, gesturing to the man. And this is Elena, my father's assistant. They'll serve as witnesses. Audrey's stomach dropped. Witnesses for what? The ceremony, Kael said, like it was obvious. Now? Audrey's voice came out too high. You want to do this now? The longer we wait, the more chance Damien has to cause problems. Kael looked at her steadily. Unless you've changed your mind. Audrey's hands were shaking. Her dress was still dripping. Her hair hung in wet tangles down her back. This was nothing like the wedding she'd imagined, the one she'd been running away from just an hour ago. But maybe that was the point. I haven't changed my mind, she said. Kael nodded. Then let's begin. The ceremony was nothing like the elaborate production Damien had planned. No flowers, no music, no guests. Just Kael and Audrey standing in a small side chapel with 2 witnesses and a man who barely looked old enough to officiate. Father Marcus spoke quickly, his voice shaking slightly. Elena stood to the side, her expression unreadable, and Kael stood across from Audrey, his gray eyes locked on hers, his hand steady when he reached for hers. Audrey's heart pounded so hard she thought everyone in the room could hear it. This was real. This was happening. She was marrying a man she'd met 20 minutes ago, a man whose family controlled half the city, a man who looked at her like she was a problem to solve rather than a person to love. But when Kael slid a simple gold band onto her finger, his mother's ring, he said quietly, something shifted in her chest. Not love, not even trust, but something like recognition. Like they were 2 people making the same desperate gamble and hoping it didn't destroy them. I now pronounce you husband and wife, Father Marcus said, his voice barely above a whisper. Kael didn't kiss her. He just held her hand for 1 more second, his thumb brushing over her knuckles, before letting go. It's done, he said. Elena and Father Marcus slipped out of the room without a word, and Audrey was left standing in the chapel in a ruined wedding dress with a gold ring on her finger and a husband she didn't know. What happens now? She asked. Kael looked at her for a long moment, and for the first time since they'd met, something almost human flickered across his face. Now, he said quietly, you become a Duval. Outside, thunder rolled across the sky, and Audrey wondered if she'd just made the best decision of her life or signed her own death warrant. Kael led her back through the hallways to the main funeral space, where the crowd was beginning to disperse. People whispered as they passed, their eyes tracking Audrey like she was a bomb waiting to explode. Kael didn't acknowledge any of them. He just kept walking, his hand resting lightly on the small of her back. A gesture that looked protective but felt like a claim. They stopped near the exit and a younger man stepped out of the shadows. He was close to Kael's age, maybe a year or 2 younger, with the same sharp features and dark hair, but where Kael's eyes were cold and controlled, this man's burned with something dangerous and unpredictable. Lucien, Kael said evenly. Lucien's gaze slid to Audrey, and a slow, dangerous smile spread across his face. "Well," he said, "this is interesting." "Stay out of it," Kyle said. "Out of what?" Lucian stepped closer, his eyes never leaving Audrey's face. "You just married a stranger at our father's funeral. That's not exactly something I can ignore." "She's my wife," Kyle said, his voice dropping into something low and lethal. "That makes her family. And if you have a problem with that—" "I don't have a problem," Lucian interrupted, still smiling. "I'm just curious. What's your name, sweetheart?" "Audrey," she said, lifting her chin. "Audrey." Lucian repeated it slowly, like he was tasting the word. "And you married my brother because—" "That's between us," Kyle said. Lucien laughed, a sharp, bitter sound that echoed off the stone walls. "Right. Of course it is." He looked at Kyle, and the smile faded. "You always did know how to make a move when everyone was looking the other way. Go home, Lucien." "I am home," Lucien said. "Same as you." He turned and walked away, disappearing into the crowd. But Audrey could still feel his eyes on her, sharp and assessing, like he'd already decided she was either a weapon or a weakness, and was just waiting to see which. Kale's hand pressed more firmly against her back. "Ignore him." "Is he always like that?" "Worse." They stepped out into the rain, and a black car pulled up to the curb immediately. The driver got out and opened the back door without a word. Kyle gestured for Audrey to get in first, and she slid across the leather seat, her wet dress leaving dark stains behind. Kyle climbed in beside her and closed the door. The driver pulled away from the curb, and Providence blurred past the windows, rain-slicked streets, glowing streetlights, the cathedral disappearing behind them. "Where are we going?" Audrey asked. "Home," Kale said. "Your home." "Our home," he corrected. "As of tonight, you live in the Duval estate." Audrey leaned her head back against the seat and closed her eyes. Less than 2 hours ago, she'd been running barefoot through the rain with no plan beyond escape. Now she was married to a crime lord and heading toward a mansion she'd never seen, wearing a wedding dress that wasn't even meant for him. Her life had officially become a nightmare. Or maybe, just maybe, it had become the only chance she had left. The car wound through the city and out toward the coast, where the old money families lived behind gates and security systems that cost more than most people's houses. The Duval estate sat at the edge of a cliff overlooking the ocean, a sprawling mansion built from stone and glass that looked more like a fortress than a home. The gates opened automatically as they approached, and the car pulled up to the front entrance. Kyle got out first and offered Audrey his hand. She took it, stepping out into the rain, which had softened to a steady drizzle. The front doors opened before they reached them, and a woman in a crisp black suit appeared in the entrance. She was older, maybe 50, with steel gray hair pulled into a tight bun, and the kind of posture that said she didn't tolerate nonsense from anyone. "Mr. Duval," she said, nodding to Kale. Then her eyes slid to Audrey, and something like surprise flickered across her face. "And Mrs. Duval, I presume?" "This is Margaret," Kale said to Audrey. "She runs the house. If you need anything, ask her." Margaret's expression remained neutral, but Audrey saw the way her gaze swept over the ruined wedding dress, the bare feet, the mascara still smudged under her eyes. Whatever Margaret thought, she kept it to herself. "Welcome home, Mrs. Duval," Margaret said. "I'll have a room prepared for you immediately." "She'll stay in my wing," Kale said. Margaret's eyebrows rose slightly. "Of course." Kale led Audrey through the entrance hall, marble floors, vaulted ceilings, a chandelier that looked like it cost more than Audrey's entire college education. Everything was pristine, polished, perfect. It felt more like a museum than a home. They climbed a wide staircase to the second floor, and Kyle stopped in front of a set of double doors at the end of a long hallway. "This is my room," he said, pushing the doors open. The space inside was enormous. A king-sized bed dominated one wall, flanked by tall windows overlooking the ocean. Dark wood furniture, charcoal walls, minimalist and cold, like everything else about him. "There's a guest room connected through there," Kyle said, pointing to a door on the far side. "You can use it until we figure out the sleeping arrangements." Audrey stepped inside, her wet dress squelching against the hardwood floor. "Sleeping arrangements?" "People will expect us to share a room," Kyle said, "but I'm not going to force you into anything you're not ready for." Audrey studied him, trying to figure out if he was being considerate or just strategic. Probably both. "Thank you," she said quietly. Kael nodded. "Margaret will bring you clothes and anything else you need. There's a bathroom through that door. Get cleaned up. We'll talk in the morning." He turned to leave and Audrey's voice stopped him. "Kael." He looked back, one hand on the doorframe. "Why did you really marry me?" she asked. The truth. Kael was silent for a long moment, his gray eyes unreadable. Then he said, "Because I needed someone who had nothing to lose. And you walked in looking like you'd already lost everything." Before Audrey could respond, he stepped out and closed the door behind him. She stood alone in the massive bedroom, water still dripping from her dress, a gold ring heavy on her finger, and the sound of the ocean crashing against the cliffs below. Somewhere in the house, she heard voices, low, tense, arguing, and Audrey realized with sudden cold clarity that she'd just walked into a war she didn't understand. Audrey woke to sunlight slicing through unfamiliar windows and the distant crash of waves against rock. For one disoriented moment, she forgot where she was. Then the weight of the gold ring on her finger brought it all back. The rain, the funeral, Kael's cold gray eyes, the vows she'd spoken to a stranger. She sat up slowly, her body aching from exhaustion. The guest room was smaller than Kael's, but still larger than any bedroom she'd ever had. Cream-colored walls, a 4-poster bed with sheets that probably cost more than her monthly rent used to. Through the windows, she could see the ocean stretching endlessly toward the horizon, dark and restless under morning clouds. Someone had left clothes folded on a chair near the door, dark jeans, a soft gray sweater, undergarments still wrapped in tissue paper. Audrey showered in the marble bathroom, scrubbing away the remnants of yesterday's mascara and the smell of rain-soaked fabric. When she looked in the mirror, she barely recognized herself. Her eyes were shadowed with exhaustion, her face pale, but there was something different in her expression, something harder. She dressed quickly and stepped out into Kael's bedroom. Empty. The bed was made with military precision, like no one had slept there at all. She walked to the door and hesitated, her hand on the handle. What the hell was she supposed to do now? Wander around a mansion full of criminals and pretend she belonged here? She opened the door anyway. The hallway was silent, except for the faint sound of voices drifting up from somewhere below. Audrey followed them, her footsteps muffled by thick carpet. The house felt enormous in daylight, endless corridors lined with oil paintings and antique furniture, rooms branching off in every direction. She passed a library, a sitting room, what looked like a home office with the door half open. The voices grew louder as she descended the main staircase. She found them in a dining room just off the entrance hall. Kael, Lucien, and 3 other men she didn't recognize, all seated around a long mahogany table covered with papers and coffee cups. Kael saw her first. His expression didn't change, but something in his posture shifted, straightened, sharpened. "Audrey." Every head turned toward her. Lucien leaned back in his chair, a slow smile spreading across his face. "Well, good morning, Mrs. Duval." Audrey ignored him and looked at Kael. "Should I come back later?" "No." Kael gestured to an empty chair beside him. "Sit." She walked to the chair and sat, acutely aware of every eye on her. The other men looked like soldiers, hardened faces, cold eyes, the kind of people who'd seen violence and stopped flinching. One of them had a scar running from his temple to his jaw. Another had knuckles that looked like they'd been broken and healed wrong multiple times. "This is Vincent, Marcus, and Rafe," Kael said, nodding to each man in turn. "They handle security and operations. This is my wife, Audrey." The word wife hung in the air like a challenge. Vincent, the one with the scar, studied her with open suspicion. "No offense, boss, but where the hell did she come from?" "That's not your concern," Kael said flatly. "It is if she's a liability." "She's not." "You married her at the funeral," Marcus said, his voice rough as gravel. "In front of half the family. People are asking questions." "Let them ask," Kael said. Lucian laughed, a sharp, bitter sound. "Oh, they're doing more than asking. Antonio's old guard thinks you've lost your mind. Mateo's already making noise about leadership changes. And Uncle Vince can go to hell," Kael interrupted. "He's calling for a family meeting," Lucien continued, like Kael hadn't spoken. "Tonight. He wants to discuss succession." Kael's jaw tightened. There's nothing to discuss. I'm the eldest. The business is mine. Is it? Lucien leaned forward, his eyes glittering with something dangerous. Because from where I'm sitting, you just handed them ammunition. You married a stranger without consulting anyone. That doesn't look like strength, brother. That looks like desperation. The air in the room turned sharp. Audrey could feel the tension coiling tighter with every word. Careful, Cale said, his voice dropping into something low and lethal. Or what? Lucien shot back. You'll remind me you're in charge? That you're the heir? That Dad trusted you more? He laughed again, uglier this time. Dad's dead, Cale, and trust doesn't mean shit if the family thinks you're unstable. Cale stood so fast his chair scraped against the floor. Get out. Lucien rose slowly, his smile never wavering. Gladly. He looked at Audrey, and his expression shifted into something almost curious. Welcome to the family, Audrey. Hope you survive it. He walked out and the room exhaled. Vincent cleared his throat. He's not wrong, boss. People are talking. Then shut them up, Cale said. It's not that simple. Make it simple. Cale's tone left no room for argument. We're done here. Get back to work. The three men stood and filed out without another word, leaving Kyle and Audrey alone in the dining room. Cale braced his hands on the table, his head bowed, breathing slow and controlled like he was forcing himself calm. Audrey waited, unsure if she should speak or leave or pretend she hadn't just witnessed whatever the hell that was. Finally, Cale straightened and looked at her. You need to understand something, he said. This family doesn't tolerate weakness. If they think you're a problem, they'll remove you. Remove me, Audrey repeated. You mean kill me? Yes. The word landed like a fist to the stomach. Audrey's hands tightened in her lap. You didn't mention that part last night. You didn't ask. Jesus Christ, Cale. You wanted out of your old life, he said, cutting her off. This is the cost. You're a Duval now. That means protection, money, power. It also means enemies. If you can't handle that, tell me now, and I'll make arrangements for you to leave. Audrey stared at him. Part of her wanted to take the offer, to walk out the door and disappear before this nightmare got any worse. But the other part, the part that had spent 2 years suffocating under Damien's control, refused to run again. I'm not leaving, she said. Cale studied her for a long moment, then nodded. Good. Then we need to get you ready. Ready for what? The family meeting tonight. You're coming with me. Audrey's stomach dropped. I don't think that's a good idea. I don't care what you think. You're my wife. If you don't show up, they'll assume you're a lie I made up to buy time. If you do show up, you prove you're real. And then what? They accept me with open arms? No, Cale said bluntly. Then they test you. They'll push, insult, try to break you, and you need to push back. I don't know how to do that. Yes, you do. Cale stepped closer, his gray eyes locked on hers. You stood up to Damien last night. You crashed a funeral full of armed men and didn't flinch. You have fire in you, Audrey. You just need to stop hiding it. Audrey swallowed hard. What if I can't? Then we're both dead. He said it so calmly, so matter-of-factly, that it took Audrey a second to process. Then the weight of it hit her, the realization that she wasn't just playing dress-up in a crime family. She was in actual danger. Kyle was in danger, and the only way out was through. Okay, she said quietly. Tell me what to do. Cale's expression softened, just barely, just for a second. Survive, he said. That's all you need to do. The rest of the morning passed in a blur of preparation. Margaret appeared with more clothes, a sleek black dress that fit perfectly, heels that made Audrey 3 inches taller, jewelry that felt like armor. A stylist arrived to fix her hair and makeup, transforming her from exhausted runaway into something polished and dangerous. When Audrey looked in the mirror, she barely recognized herself. The woman staring back looked like she belonged in this world, confident, composed, untouchable. It was a lie, but it was a convincing one. Kyle found her in the guest room an hour before they were supposed to leave. He changed into a dark suit, his hair slicked back, every inch of him radiating control. He looked her over once, his gaze clinical, assessing. You look the part, he said. Is that a compliment? It's a fact. He pulled something from his pocket, a slim black box, and handed it to her. Wear this. Audrey opened the box. Inside was a necklace, a single diamond pendant on a platinum chain, simple and devastatingly expensive. "It was my mother's," Kyle said. "People will recognize it. It sends a message." Audrey's fingers trembled slightly as she lifted the necklace from the box. "What message?" "That you're mine." The word settled over her like a brand. Audrey turned and lifted her hair so Kyle could fasten the clasp. His fingers brushed the back of her neck, warm, steady, and she felt a shiver run down her spine that had nothing to do with fear. "There," he said, stepping back. "Now you're ready." The family meeting was held at a private club downtown, the kind of place that didn't advertise, didn't have a sign, and only opened its doors to people with the right last name. Kyle's driver pulled up to a nondescript brick building, and two men in black suits opened the car doors before the engine even cut off. Kyle got out first and offered Audrey his hand. She took it, stepping onto the sidewalk in her heels, the diamond pendant cold against her skin. "Stay close," Kyle murmured. "Don't speak unless someone addresses you directly. And if anyone tries to intimidate you, look them in the eye and don't back down." "That's it? That's the plan?" "That's the plan." They walked through a heavy steel door into a narrow hallway lined with more men in suits. No one stopped them, but Audrey felt every pair of eyes tracking her movement. They climbed a staircase to the second floor and entered a large private room with leather chairs arranged in a circle and windows overlooking the street below. 15 people were already there. Men mostly, though Audrey spotted two women near the back, both older, both watching her with the kind of sharp assessment that made her skin prickle. Lucien stood near the bar, a glass of whiskey in hand, his expression unreadable. And at the center of the room, seated in the largest chair like a king on a throne, was an older man with iron-gray hair and a face carved from stone. "Uncle Vince," Audrey guessed. Kyle's hand pressed lightly against her back, guiding her forward. They stopped a few feet from Vince's chair, and Kyle inclined his head slightly. Not a bow, but an acknowledgement. "Uncle," Kyle said. Vince's cold eyes swept over Audrey, taking in every detail, the dress, the heels, the necklace. "So it's true," he said. "You actually married her." "I did." "At Antonio's funeral?" "Yes." Vince's jaw tightened. "That was disrespectful." "It was necessary." "Necessary." Vince stood slowly, and the room seemed to shrink around him. He was shorter than Kale, but broader, built like a man who'd spent his life breaking things. "You want to tell me why it was necessary to marry a stranger none of us have vetted? A woman with no family connections, no background in this life, no reason to be standing in this room?" "She's my wife," Kyle said evenly. "That's all the reason she needs." "Bullshit." Vince stepped closer, his gaze boring into Kale. "You're trying to solidify your claim before anyone can challenge it. You think a wedding ring makes you legitimate?" "I think being Antonio's eldest son makes me legitimate." "Your father's dead," Vince said, "and leadership isn't inherited, it's earned." The room went silent. Audrey could feel the weight of every eye on them, waiting to see what Kyle would do. "Are you challenging me?" Kyle asked, his voice dangerously quiet. Vince smiled, a cold, humorless expression. "I'm reminding you that this family has rules. And one of those rules is that we don't make reckless decisions without consulting the people who've bled for this organization." "Then consider yourself consulted," Kyle said. "I'm married. I'm in control. And if anyone has a problem with that, they can take it up with me directly." Vince's eyes flicked to Audrey. "And what about her? What does she bring to this family besides a pretty face?" Audrey's pulse spiked. Kale had told her to stay quiet, but she could feel the challenge hanging in the air, the test he'd warned her about. If she stayed silent, she'd look weak. If she spoke, she'd better make it count. She lifted her chin and met Vince's gaze head-on. "I bring loyalty," she said, "which is more than I can say for people who question their own family at the first opportunity." The room rippled with shock. Somewhere near the bar, Lucien choked on his whiskey. Vince's expression darkened. "You've got a mouth on you." "You asked a question," Audrey said. "I answered it." "Audrey, Kyle started, but she kept going. "You want to know what I bring to this family? I bring the ability to see through bullshit. And right now I'm looking at a man who's more interested in tearing Kale down than protecting what his brother built." Vince took a step toward her, and Kale moved between them so fast Audrey barely saw it happen. "Enough," Kale said, his voice cutting through the tension like a blade. "Your wife doesn't know when to shut up," Vince said. "My wife," Kale said slowly, "just told you the truth. If you can't handle that, it's not her problem." For a long, terrible moment, Audrey thought Vince was going to hit someone. Kale, her, it didn't matter. Then he stepped back, his hands raised in mock surrender. "Fine," Vince said. "You want to lead? Lead. But don't come crying to me when this blows up in your face." He turned and walked out, and half the room followed him. The people who stayed looked uneasy, shifting in their chairs, exchanging glances. One of the older women, silver-haired, elegant, with eyes like cut glass, stood and walked over to Audrey. "Evelyn's necklace," she said, gesturing to the pendant. "I haven't seen that in years." "Kael gave it to me," Audrey said carefully. The woman smiled, a real smile, warm and sad at the same time. "She would have liked you. She didn't take shit from anyone either." She extended her hand. "I'm Sophia, Antonio's sister." Audrey shook her hand, relief flooding through her. "Nice to meet you. You've got guts, girl. That's good. You're going to need them." Sophia glanced at Kael. "Take care of her, nephew. She's the first interesting thing to happen to this family in years." Sophia left, and the rest of the room slowly emptied until only Kael, Audrey, and Lucien remained. Lucien walked over, still holding his whiskey, his eyes bright with something that might have been amusement. "Well," he said, "that was entertaining." "Shut up, Lucien," Kael said. "I'm serious. She just told Uncle Vince to go fuck himself in front of the entire family. That takes balls." "Or stupidity," Kael muttered. Lucien's gaze slid to Audrey, and his smile sharpened. "I like her." "You don't get to like her," Kael said. "Why not? She's family now, isn't she?" Lucien took a step closer, and Audrey caught the scent of whiskey and expensive cologne. "Tell me, Audrey, do you always have a death wish, or is today special?" "I don't have a death wish," Audrey said. "I just don't see the point in pretending to be something I'm not." Lucien laughed, loud and genuine this time. "Oh, I really like her." "Lucien," Kael said, his voice dropping into a warning. "Relax, brother. I'm just getting to know my new sister-in-law." Lucien's eyes stayed on Audrey, sharp and assessing. "You know, you're either the smartest person in this room or the dumbest. I haven't decided which yet." "Neither have I," Audrey said. Lucien grinned. "See? I told you I liked her." Kael grabbed Audrey's arm, not hard, but firm enough to make his point. "We're leaving." He pulled her toward the door, and Audrey glanced back to see Lucien watching them with that same dangerous smile, like he'd just found a new toy to play with. The drive back to the estate was silent. Kael stared out the window, his jaw tight, his hands clenched into fists on his lap. Audrey could feel the anger radiating off him in waves. "You told me to push back," she said finally. "I told you to push back if someone tested you," Kael said. "I didn't tell you to pick a fight with the most dangerous man in the room." "He was insulting you." "I don't care." "Well, I do." Audrey turned in her seat to face him. "You married me to make yourself look stronger. If I sit there like a statue and let people walk all over you, what's the point?" Kael finally looked at her, his gray eyes blazing. "The point is staying alive. You think Vince is just going to forget what you said? You think he's going to let that slide? If he tries something, isn't that your problem?" "It's our problem," Kael snapped. "You're in this now, Audrey. Every move you make reflects on me. Every word you say puts a target on both our backs." Audrey's chest tightened with frustration. "Then maybe you should have explained that before dragging me into a room full of criminals and expecting me to figure it out on my own." Kael's jaw worked, and for a second she thought he might actually yell. Then he turned back to the window and said nothing. They didn't speak for the rest of the drive. Back at the estate, Audrey went straight to the guest room and slammed the door behind her. She kicked off her heels, tore off the necklace, and threw it on the dresser. Her hands were shaking. From anger, from fear, from the adrenaline crash that came from realizing she'd just gambled her life in front of a room full of people who could make her disappear without a trace. She sat on the edge of the bed and dropped her head into her hands. What the hell was she doing? A knock sounded on the door. Audrey didn't answer. "It's me!" Lucien's voice came through the wood. "Open up. Go away." "Can't. I brought wine." Despite herself, Audrey opened the door. Lucien stood in the hallway holding 2 glasses and a bottle of red that probably cost more than her car used to. "Peace offering," he said. "I don't want company." "Too bad." He walked past her into the room and set the glasses on the nightstand, pouring generous amounts into both. "You look like you could use a drink." Audrey closed the door and crossed her arms. "Did Kael send you?" "God, no. Kael's downstairs brooding and pretending he's not furious with you." Lucien handed her a glass. "I came because I'm curious." "About what?" "About you." Lucien sat on the edge of her bed like he owned the place, studying her with those sharp, dangerous eyes. "You don't act like someone who just married into a crime family. You act like someone who has nothing to lose." "Maybe I don't. Everyone has something to lose." He took a sip of wine. "So what's your story? What made you desperate enough to marry my brother?" Audrey hesitated. She didn't owe Lucien anything, didn't trust him, didn't even particularly like him, but there was something in his expression that felt almost genuine, like he actually wanted to know. "I was running from someone," she said finally. "Kael gave me a way out." "And you took it." "Wouldn't you?" Lucien laughed softly. "Probably, though I wouldn't have insulted Uncle Vince in the process. He deserved it." "Oh, he absolutely did. That's not the point." Lucien leaned forward, his elbows on his knees. "The point is that you just made yourself interesting. And in this family, interesting people either rise very fast or disappear very quickly." "Which one am I?" "That depends on Kael." Lucien's expression shifted into something harder. "My brother is good at control. He's good at strategy, but he's terrible at letting people in. And if you want to survive here, you're going to need him to actually care whether you live or die." Audrey's stomach twisted. "What makes you think he doesn't?" "Because I know him. And I know he married you for power, not love." Lucien stood and walked to the door, then paused with his hand on the handle. "But for what it's worth, I think you're exactly the kind of chaos he needs." He left before Audrey could respond. She sat alone in the guest room, the wine glass cold in her hand, and wondered if she'd just been warned or complimented. The next few days passed in uneasy quiet. Kael threw himself into work, meetings, phone calls, late nights in his office with the door closed. Audrey saw him at meals sometimes, but he barely spoke to her. The warmth from their wedding night, if it could even be called warmth, had evaporated completely. Margaret showed her around the estate, explaining routines and expectations. Audrey learned where the security cameras were, which rooms were off limits, how to navigate the maze of hallways without getting lost. She met more staff, drivers, housekeepers, a chef who spoke mostly in Italian and fed her pastries every morning, but the isolation was suffocating. Audrey wasn't allowed to leave the grounds without security. She couldn't call anyone from her old life. Margaret had taken her phone the first night and replaced it with a new one that had exactly 3 numbers programmed: Kael, Margaret, and emergency services. She was a prisoner in a mansion, and the bars were made of marble and money. On the 4th night, Audrey found Lucien in the library, sprawled in a leather chair with a book he clearly wasn't reading. "Can't sleep?" he asked without looking up. "Can't breathe," Audrey said. Lucien closed the book and studied her. "Kael still giving you the silent treatment?" "He's not giving me anything. He's pretending I don't exist." "That's his specialty." Lucien gestured to the chair across from him. "Sit. Tell me what's wrong." "Everything's wrong," Audrey said, sitting. "I married a man I don't know. I'm trapped in a house I can't leave, and your family wants me dead." "Not all of them. Sophia likes you." "One person." "Great." Lucien smiled. "You're doing better than you think." "Am I?" "Because from where I'm sitting, I'm completely alone." "You're not alone." Lucien leaned forward, his eyes locking on hers. "You have me." Audrey froze. There was something in his voice, something soft and sharp at the same time, like a blade wrapped in silk. "Why are you being nice to me?" she asked carefully. "Because I like you." "I told you that already." "You don't even know me." "I know enough." Lucien reached across the space between them and brushed a strand of hair behind her ear. The gesture was intimate, deliberate, and it made Audrey's pulse spike. "I know you're brave, I know you're smart, and I know my brother doesn't deserve you." Audrey pulled back. "Don't." "Don't what?" "Whatever this is, don't." Lucian's smile widened, but there was something dangerous underneath it. I'm not doing anything. I'm just telling the truth. The truth is that you're trying to get under Kael's skin, Audrey said, and I'm not going to be your weapon. Lucian's expression shifted. Surprise, maybe, or respect. You're smarter than I thought. Yeah, well, I'm a quick learner. She stood and walked to the door, but Lucian's voice stopped her. Audrey. She looked back. For what it's worth, Lucian said quietly, I meant what I said. Kael doesn't deserve you, but that doesn't mean I'm lying about the rest. Audrey didn't answer. She just left, her heart pounding, and tried to convince herself she didn't feel anything when Lucian looked at her like that. The breaking point came a week later. Audrey woke to shouting, loud, furious, coming from somewhere downstairs. She threw on a robe and ran into the hallway, following the sound to Kael's office on the first floor. The door was open. Inside, Kael stood behind his desk, his face carved from stone, while Lucian paced like a caged animal. You can't make that call without me, Lucian was saying. I don't need your permission, Kael shot back. The hell you don't. I'm part of this family too. Then act like it. Lucian laughed, bitter and sharp. I act like it every goddamn day. I clean up your messes. I handle the jobs you're too busy to deal with, and you still treat me like a fucking errand boy. Because you act like one. The words landed like a punch. Lucian stopped pacing, his hands clenched into fists. Say that again, he said quietly. You heard me. Lucian moved so fast Audrey barely saw it. 1 second he was across the room, the next he had Kael pinned against the desk, his forearm pressed to Kael's throat. You want to tell me I'm useless? Lucian snarled. After everything I've done? After every time I've bled for this family while you sit in Dad's chair pretending you earned it? Kael shoved him back, hard enough that Lucian stumbled. I did earn it. Bullshit. You inherited it because you were born first. That's not earning. That's luck. Then challenge me, Kael said, his voice cold and deadly. Go ahead, Lucian. Call a vote. See if the family backs you over me. Lucian's jaw tightened. Maybe I will. Then do it. Stop hiding behind insults and actually make a move. For a terrible moment, Audrey thought Lucian might actually hit him. Then Lucian's gaze flicked past Kael and landed on her, standing frozen in the doorway. His expression changed, softened, just slightly. What's the point? Lucian said, stepping back. You've already got everything you want. He walked past Audrey without another word, his shoulder brushing hers as he left. Kael slumped against the desk, his breathing ragged. Are you okay? Audrey asked quietly. Get out, Kael said without looking at her. Kael, I said get out. His voice cracked like a whip, and Audrey flinched. She turned and left, her chest tight with something she couldn't name. She found Lucian on the back terrace, smoking a cigarette and staring out at the ocean. You shouldn't be here, he said without turning. Neither should you. Lucian laughed softly. Fair. Audrey walked to the railing and stood beside him, close enough to feel the heat of the cigarette smoke curling between them. What was that about? Family business. Bullshit, that was personal. Lucian took a drag and exhaled slowly. You're getting too good at reading people. It's not hard when you're all screaming at each other. He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. Kael and I have been fighting since we were kids. Nothing new. It looked new. Lucian turned to face her, and the intensity in his gaze made her breath catch. You want to know the truth? I'm tired. I'm tired of being second. I'm tired of watching him take credit for work I do. And I'm especially tired of pretending I don't care. Then why do you stay? Because he's my brother, and no matter how much I hate him, I can't just walk away. Audrey understood that, the complicated, tangled mess of loyalty and resentment that came with family. She'd felt it with her own parents, before they died and left her alone at 19. For what it's worth, she said quietly, I don't think he takes you for granted. Yes, he does. He just doesn't realize it. Lucian dropped the cigarette and crushed it under his heel, then turned to face her fully. They were close. Too close. Audrey could smell the smoke on him, see the exhaustion in his eyes. Why are you really here, Audrey? He asked. I told you. You look like you needed company. No. I mean, why are you here in this house with Kael? Audrey's pulse quickened. I don't understand. Yes, you do. Lucian reached up and touched her face, just barely, his thumb brushing her cheekbone. You're too smart to believe this marriage is real, so what are you getting out of it? Freedom, Audrey said, her voice barely above a whisper. From what? From being invisible. Something in Lucian's expression cracked, just for a second, just enough for Audrey to see the loneliness underneath. I know that feeling, he said softly. They stood like that, frozen in the space between something dangerous and something inevitable. And Audrey realized with sudden, terrifying clarity that Lucien wasn't just trying to get under Kael's skin. He was trying to get under hers. And it was working. Before she could say anything, the terrace door opened and Kael stepped out. He stopped when he saw them, Lucien's hand still on Audrey's face, the space between them too small, too intimate. Kael's expression went completely blank. Get away from my wife, he said, his voice quiet and lethal. Lucien dropped his hand and stepped back, but the damage was already done. Kael's eyes burned with something Audrey had never seen before. Not anger, not control, but raw, unfiltered jealousy. We need to talk, Kael said, his gaze locked on Audrey. Kael, now. He turned and walked back inside, and Audrey had no choice but to follow, her heart pounding, knowing that whatever came next was going to change everything. Kael didn't stop walking until they reached his office. He held the door open, waiting, and Audrey stepped inside with her pulse hammering in her throat. The door closed behind them with a sound like a vault sealing shut. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Kael stood with his back to her, one hand braced against his desk, his shoulders rigid with tension. Audrey could see the muscles in his jaw working, like he was physically restraining himself from saying something he couldn't take back. How long? He asked finally, his voice dangerously quiet. How long what? How long have you been fucking my brother? The accusation hit her like a slap. I haven't Don't lie to me. Kael turned, and the look in his eyes made her take a step back. I saw you. I saw the way he touched you, the way you let him. He brushed my cheek, Kael. That's it. That's it? Kael laughed, a harsh, bitter sound. You were alone with him on the terrace in the middle of the night. You were close enough to kiss. And you're telling me that's nothing? It is nothing. Then why didn't you pull away? Audrey opened her mouth and found she didn't have an answer, because the truth was she hadn't pulled away. She'd stood there, frozen, feeling something dangerous coil between them. That's what I thought, Kael said. You don't get to do this, Audrey said, her own anger rising now. You don't get to ignore me for a week, treat me like I don't exist, and then act like I've betrayed you because your brother showed me 5 seconds of basic human kindness. Lucien doesn't do kindness. He does manipulation. Maybe. But at least he talks to me. Kael's expression hardened. Is that what you want? Someone to talk to? Someone to make you feel special? I want someone to treat me like a person instead of a chess piece. You knew what this was. Kael stepped closer, his voice dropping lower. You knew this was a business arrangement. I gave you money, protection, a name. What the hell more do you want from me? I want you to act like you give a shit whether I'm here or not. The words came out louder than she intended, echoing off the walls. Kael stared at her, something flickering in his eyes that might have been surprise or might have been pain. I married you, he said quietly. I put my name on you in front of my entire family. How is that not giving a shit? Because you did it for yourself, Audrey said. Not for me. You needed a wife to solidify your power, and I happened to walk through the door at the right time. That's it. That's all I am to you. You don't know what you are to me. Then tell me. Kael's jaw tightened. He looked like he wanted to say something real, something vulnerable. But the words wouldn't come. Instead, he turned away, his hands clenched into fists at his sides. Get out, he said. Kael, I said get out. Audrey stood frozen for one more second, her chest aching with frustration, and something else she couldn't name. Then she turned and left, slamming the door behind her hard enough to rattle the frame. She made it halfway up the stairs before the tears came, hot, furious, spilling down her cheeks faster than she could wipe them away. She wasn't crying because Kael had yelled at her. She was crying because she'd been stupid enough to think this could be anything more than what it was. A transaction, a deal, a marriage built on desperation instead of anything real. She locked herself in the guest room and didn't come out for the rest of the night. The next morning, Margaret knocked on the door with breakfast and a carefully neutral expression. "Mr. Duval is asking for you," she said. "Tell him I'm not feeling well." Margaret's eyes softened. "Mrs. Duval, I don't think that's wise." "I don't care what's wise. I don't want to see him." Margaret hesitated, then nodded and left. An hour later, she returned with a message. Kael had left for the city and wouldn't be back until evening. Audrey felt a perverse sense of relief mixed with disappointment. She spent the day wandering the estate like a ghost, avoiding the staff, avoiding Lucien, avoiding everyone. She found herself in the library around noon, staring at shelves of books she couldn't focus on, when Sophia appeared in the doorway. "Mind if I join you?" Sophia asked. Audrey shrugged. "It's your family's house." Sophia smiled and settled into one of the leather chairs, gesturing for Audrey to sit. "I heard about last night." "Of course you did. It's a small family. People talk." Sophia studied her with those sharp, kind eyes. "You want to know what I think?" "Not really." "I think you're exactly what Kael needs, and that terrifies him." Audrey looked up. "What?" "My nephew has spent his entire life being in control," Sophia said. "Control over the family, control over the business, control over himself. And then you walked in and threw all of that into chaos. He doesn't know how to handle you, so he's doing what he always does, pushing you away before you can hurt him." "I'm not trying to hurt him." "I know, but he doesn't." Sophia leaned forward. "Kael's mother died giving birth to Lucien. Did you know that?" Audrey shook her head. "Evelyn was the only person who ever made Antonio soft. When she died, something broke in this family. Antonio blamed Lucien for years, wouldn't even look at him without seeing the woman he'd lost. And Kael tried to fill that void. He became the perfect son, the responsible one, the heir. But underneath all that control is a terrified boy who's convinced that loving someone means losing them." Audrey's throat tightened. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because you need to understand what you're up against. Kael will push you away. He'll hurt you. He'll make you feel like you don't matter. But it's not because he doesn't care. It's because he cares too much, and he doesn't know how to survive it." Sophia stood and walked to the door, then paused. "Give him time. And don't let Lucien get in your head. That boy is brilliant and charming and absolutely lethal when he wants to be." She left, and Audrey sat alone with the weight of everything she'd just learned pressing down on her chest. Kael returned that evening looking like he hadn't slept. He found Audrey in the garden, sitting on a stone bench near the roses, and stopped a few feet away like he wasn't sure if he was allowed to get closer. "We need to talk," he said. "I'm listening." Kael sat down beside her, careful to leave space between them. He stared at his hands for a long moment before speaking. "I was out of line last night," he said. "I shouldn't have accused you of something that didn't happen." "But you believe it could happen." "I don't know what I believe." Kael's voice was rough, tired. "I just know that seeing you with Lucien made me feel things I don't know how to handle." "What things?" "Jealousy, anger, fear." He finally looked at her, and the rawness in his eyes made her breath catch. "I don't want to care about you, Audrey. I don't want to need you, but I do, and it's making me insane." Audrey's chest ached. "You have a terrible way of showing it. I know. So what now?" Kael reached over and took her hand, tentative, uncertain, like he was afraid she'd pull away. "Now we try to figure out how to make this work. Not as a business arrangement, as something real." Audrey wanted to believe him. She wanted to trust that the man sitting beside her was the same one who'd married her in a private chapel and looked at her like she mattered. But trust was a luxury she couldn't afford. "Okay," she said quietly, "but no more shutting me out." "No more shutting you out," Kael agreed. They sat like that, hands clasped, the ocean crashing against the cliffs below, and for the first time since she'd walked into this family, Audrey felt like maybe she wasn't completely alone. The fragile peace lasted exactly 3 days. On the 4th morning, Audrey woke to raised voices downstairs. She found Kael and Vincent in the entrance hall, both of them looking grim. "What's going on?" Audrey asked. Kale's expression was unreadable. Get dressed. We're leaving in 20 minutes. Where are we going? The city. There's been a development. He didn't explain further and Audrey didn't push. She dressed quickly in dark jeans and a sweater, pulling her hair into a ponytail. When she came back downstairs, Kyle was already waiting by the car, his phone pressed to his ear, his expression carved from stone. The drive into Providence was tense and silent. Kale spent the entire time on the phone, speaking in clipped sentences that told Audrey nothing. Vincent drove, his eyes constantly flicking to the rearview mirror like he expected trouble. They pulled up to a nondescript office building downtown, and Kyle led her inside to an elevator that required a keycard to operate. They rode to the top floor in silence. The elevator doors opened onto a sleek conference room with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the harbor. And sitting at the head of the table, looking perfectly comfortable, was Damian Mercer. Audrey's blood turned to ice. "Hello, Audrey," Damian said, smiling. Kale's hand shot out, grabbing her arm before she could bolt. "Stay calm," he murmured. "What the hell is he doing here?" Audrey's voice came out strangled. "Apparently," Kale said, his eyes never leaving Damian, "your ex-fiancé has information we need." Damian stood, smoothing his suit jacket. He looked exactly the same, polished, confident, untouchable. Like the last 2 weeks hadn't happened, like Audrey hadn't run from him in the rain. "You look well," Damian said to her. "Marriage suits you." "Go to hell," Damian laughed. "Still angry, I see. That's fair. I probably deserve it." "You deserve worse than that," Audrey said. "Maybe." Damian's smile sharpened. "But right now, I have something your husband needs, so maybe we can put our personal issues aside for 5 minutes and talk business." Kyle pulled out a chair for Audrey, and she sat, her hands clenched so tight in her lap, her knuckles went white. Kyle sat beside her, close enough that their shoulders touched, a silent reminder that she wasn't alone. "Talk," Kyle said to Damian. Damian settled back into his chair, looking pleased with himself. "I've been doing some digging since Audrey left, trying to understand why she'd run straight into the arms of Providence's most notorious crime family." He paused. "Turns out, it wasn't random at all." Audrey's stomach dropped. "What are you talking about?" Kale asked, his voice dangerously quiet. "I'm talking about your dear Uncle Vince," Damian said, "who's been making some very interesting moves behind your back, including reaching out to certain people in my circles, lawyers, politicians, businessmen, trying to build a case to have you removed as head of the family." Kale's expression didn't change, but Audrey felt him go rigid beside her. "And what does that have to do with Audrey?" Kale asked. "Everything." Damian leaned forward. "Because the night Audrey ran from me, someone sent her to that funeral. Someone who knew exactly what would happen if a desperate woman in a wedding dress crashed Antonio Duval's service. Someone who knew you'd see an opportunity and take it." Audrey's heart stopped. "What?" "You were set up," Damian said, looking at her with something almost like pity. "The cathedral you ran into wasn't random. You were herded there. The doors were unlocked specifically so you'd have somewhere to go. And when you walked in, Vince made sure the entire family saw it. Saw Kyle make an impulsive decision, marry a stranger, compromise his judgment. Also, Vince would have grounds to challenge his leadership." "You're lying," Audrey said, but her voice shook. "Am I?" Damian pulled a folder from his briefcase and slid it across the table. "Security footage from that night. Notice the man in the blue jacket following you 3 blocks behind? That's one of Vince's guys. He's been tailing you since you left the original cathedral, making sure you ended up exactly where you did." Kyle opened the folder. Audrey watched his face as he flipped through the photos, and she saw the exact moment he realized Damian was telling the truth. "Why are you telling us this?" Kyle asked, his voice hollow. "Because Vince approached me last week," Damian said. "Offered me a job. Help him discredit you, and he'd make sure I got Audrey back. He assumed I'd want revenge for the humiliation, and honestly, part of me did." "But," Kale prompted. "But I'm not an idiot," Damian said, "but Vince is planning a coup, and when he takes over, everyone who helped you is going to disappear, including Audrey." The words hung in the air like a death sentence. Audrey couldn't breathe, couldn't think, couldn't process the fact that everything, her escape, her marriage, her entire new life, had been orchestrated by someone who wanted to use her as a weapon against the man sitting beside her. "So what do you want?" Kyle asked Damian. "I want immunity," Damian said. from whatever's about to happen between you and Vince. I give you this information, you leave me alone. Done, K.L. said immediately. Damien nodded and stood. Then we're finished here. He looked at Audrey one last time, and something almost human flickered in his eyes. For what it's worth, I am sorry. About all of it. Get out, Audrey said, her voice shaking. Damien left, and the silence that followed was suffocating. K.L. sat frozen, staring at the photos spread across the table. Audrey could see his mind working, calculating, trying to figure out how to salvage a situation that was already falling apart. I need to think, K.L. said finally. K.L., not now. He stood abruptly, the chair scraping against the floor. I need to figure out what the hell to do about this. We need to figure it out, Audrey corrected. This affects both of us. No, it affects me. You were just a pawn. The words landed like a punch. Audrey stood, her hands shaking. That's not fair. Fair? Kyle turned on her, and the look in his eyes was devastating. You want to talk about fair? I married you because I thought you were real. I thought you were someone who needed help, someone I could trust, and it turns out you were just bait in my uncle's trap. I didn't know. It doesn't matter, Kale's voice cracked. Don't you see? It doesn't matter if you knew or not. The damage is done. Vince used you to make me look weak, and now the entire family is questioning my judgment. So what are you saying? Audrey's voice came out small, broken. Kale's jaw worked. He looked at her like he was trying to memorize her face, and when he spoke, his voice was hollow. I'm saying I made a mistake, and I need to fix it. What does that mean? It means we need to end this, quietly, before Vince can use it against me any further. Audrey felt something crack inside her chest. You want a divorce. I want to survive, Kale said. And right now, staying married to you is a death sentence for both of us. You said we'd figure this out together. That was before I knew the truth. Audrey's vision blurred. She'd known this marriage wasn't real, had gone into it with her eyes open, telling herself it was just business, just survival. But somewhere along the way, it had become more than that. Somewhere along the way, she'd started to believe Kyle might actually care. She'd been wrong. Fine, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. If that's what you want. It's not about what I want. Yes, it is. Audrey grabbed her jacket from the back of the chair. It's always about what you want, what you need, what makes your life easier, and I'm done being a piece on your chessboard. She walked to the elevator and jabbed the button. The doors opened immediately, and she stepped inside. Audrey, wait. The doors closed, cutting off whatever Kyle was about to say. Audrey made it to this ground floor before the tears came. She stumbled out onto the street, gasping for air, her chest so tight she thought her ribs might crack. People stared as they passed, but she didn't care. She just kept walking, no destination in mind, just moving because staying still felt impossible. She'd been used, manipulated, turned into a weapon in a war she hadn't even known was happening. And the worst part was that she'd started to believe she mattered, that Kyle saw her as something more than a convenient solution to his problems. She should have known better. She ended up at a small park overlooking the harbor, sitting on a bench with her knees pulled to her chest, watching boats drift across the water. The sun was starting to set, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink that felt obscenely beautiful compared to the wreckage of her life. Thought I might find you here. Audrey looked up to find Lucien standing a few feet away, hands in his pockets, his expression unreadable. Go away, she said. Can't. Kyle sent me to make sure you didn't do something stupid. Like what? Run away again? Audrey laughed bitterly. That worked out so well the last time. Lucien sat down beside her, careful to leave space between them. He told me what Damien said. Good for him. He's an idiot, you know. Audrey looked at him. What? Kyle. He's an idiot. He's convinced himself that cutting you loose is the smart move, but all he's doing is playing right into Vince's hands. How? Because Vince wanted Kale to marry you, Lucien said, and now he wants Kale to divorce you. Either way, it makes my brother look impulsive, emotional, incapable of leading. The only way to win is to refuse to play the game. What does that mean? Lucien turned to face her fully, and the intensity in his eyes made her pulse spike. It means you stay married, you double down. You make this marriage so real, so solid, that no one can question it. Kael doesn't want that. Kael's scared. There's a difference. Lucien reached over and tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. The same gesture from the terrace, intimate and deliberate. You could save him, Audrey, if you wanted to. Why would I want to save someone who just threw me away? Because you're not the kind of person who gives up when things get hard. Lucian's thumb brushed her cheekbone. And because I think you care about him, even if you don't want to admit it. Audrey's breath caught. Lucien was too close, his eyes too sharp, his touch too gentle, and she was too raw, too hurt, too desperate for someone to tell her she mattered. Lucien, she said quietly, what are you doing? Giving you a choice. His hand slid to the back of her neck, and Audrey's heart hammered against her ribs. You can go back to Kael and fight for something that might not even be real, or you can walk away from all of it, him, the family, the danger, and let me help you disappear. Why would you help me? Because I like you, Lucien said, and because I'm tired of watching my brother destroy everything good that comes into his life. Audrey's mind screamed at her to pull away, to stand up, to put distance between them, but her body wouldn't move. She was frozen, caught between Lucien's pull and Kael's rejection, between running away and standing her ground. I can't just leave, she said. Why not? Because, Audrey's voice broke, because I don't have anywhere else to go. Lucian's expression softened, and for just a second he looked almost vulnerable. Yes, you do. He leaned in, and Audrey knew, with absolute certainty, that if she let this happen, there would be no going back. Kissing Lucien would destroy whatever fragile thing existed between her and Kael. It would prove to the family that she was exactly what Vince wanted them to believe. A distraction, a weakness, a woman who couldn't be trusted. But Kael had already made his choice. He'd already pushed her away. So why shouldn't she let herself fall? Lucian's mouth was an inch from hers when a voice cut through the air like a blade. Get away from my wife. Audrey jerked back, her heart slamming into her throat. Kael stood 10 feet away, his chest heaving, his gray eyes burning with something wild and desperate. Lucien stood slowly, his hands raised. We were just talking. Bullshit. Kael closed the distance between them in 3 long strides. You were trying to take something that doesn't belong to you. She's not a possession, Kael. I know exactly what she is. Kael's voice dropped low and dangerous. And she's mine. Then maybe you should have thought of that before you told her you were ending the marriage, Lucien shot back. Kael's jaw tightened. That's between me and Audrey. Is it? Because from where I'm standing, you just gave her up. And if you're not going to take care of her, someone should. The punch happened so fast, Audrey almost missed it. 1 second Lucien was standing, and the next he was on the ground, blood streaming from his nose. Kael stood over him, his fist still clenched, breathing hard. She's my wife, Kael said, his voice shaking. And if you touch her again, I'll kill you. Lucien wiped blood from his face and laughed, ragged and bitter. You're unbelievable. Get out of here, Kael said. Gladly. Lucien stood, his eyes locking on Audrey one last time. The offer stands. When you're ready to leave, I'll help you. He walked away, and Audrey was left standing alone with Kael, the air between them crackling with tension and unspoken words. Are you okay? Kael asked, his voice rough. No, Audrey said. I'm not okay. You told me you wanted to end this. You told me staying married to me was a death sentence, and now you're punching your brother because he got too close? I shouldn't have said that. Which part? The part where you threw me away, or the part where you called me yours? Kael flinched. All of it. I was scared, and I took it out on you. That's not good enough. Audrey's voice cracked. I've spent my whole life letting men control me, and I'm not doing it anymore. Not with Damien, not with Lucien, and not with you. Then what do you want? I want the truth. Audrey stepped closer, forcing Kael to look at her. Do you actually care about me, or am I just a convenient solution to your problems? Kael stared at her, and for the first time since she'd met him, she saw the mask crack completely. I care, he said, his voice breaking. God help me, I care so much it's tearing me apart. Then prove it. How? Fight for me, Audrey said. Stop pushing me away every time you get scared. Stop treating me like I'm disposable. And for once in your life, let someone in. Kael's hands came up to frame her face, his thumbs brushing away tears she hadn't realized she was crying. I don't know how to do this, he said. I don't know how to be what you need. Then we'll figure it out together. What if I fail? Then we fail together. Kael's forehead dropped against hers, and Audrey felt him shaking, this man who controlled an empire, who never showed weakness, who'd built walls so high she'd thought they were impossible to climb. And she realized that Sophia had been right. Underneath all the control was just a terrified boy who'd convinced himself that loving someone meant losing them. I'm not going anywhere, Audrey whispered, but you have to let me stay. Kael pulled back just enough to look at her, and the rawness in his eyes made her chest ache. Okay, he said. Okay. He kissed her, desperate and fierce, and nothing like the controlled man she thought she knew. Audrey kissed him back, pouring every ounce of frustration and fear and hope into it, and for the first time since she'd crashed that funeral, she felt like she was exactly where she was supposed to be. When they finally pulled apart, both breathing hard, Kael rested his forehead against hers again. We need to go back, he said. We need to deal with Vince. How? I don't know yet, but whatever we do it together. Audrey nodded, and they walked back to the car, hand in hand, the setting sun painting the harbor in shades of fire. But as they drove back toward the estate, Audrey couldn't shake the feeling that the worst was still coming. Because Vince had orchestrated her entire life for the past 2 weeks, and men like that didn't give up just because their plan hit a snag. They escalated, and when they got back to the estate and found Vincent waiting at the front door with an expression like death, Audrey knew the escalation had already begun. Boss, Vincent said, his voice tight, we have a problem. What kind of problem? The kind that involves federal agents, a warrant, and allegations that you've been laundering money through shell corporations tied to your wife's name. Audrey's blood turned to ice. What? Vincent handed Kael a document, and Audrey watched the color drain from her husband's face as he read. Vince, Kael said, his voice hollow, he's framing us both. For what? Audrey asked. Kael looked at her, and the devastation in his eyes made her stomach drop. For crimes that carry a 20-year sentence. And if we can't prove we're innocent, we're both going to prison. The world tilted sideways. Audrey grabbed the doorframe to steady herself, her mind racing. Vince hadn't just set them up to fail. He'd set them up to be destroyed, publicly, legally, permanently. And there was no way out. What do we do? Audrey whispered. Kael looked at the document, then at her, then at the estate behind them, the home that had become a trap, the family that had become a weapon, the marriage that had become a noose. We fight, he said, and we pray it's enough. But the look in his eyes said he wasn't sure prayer would save them. The federal agents arrived at dawn. Audrey heard them before she saw them, car doors slamming, boots on gravel, voices calling out commands that echoed off the stone walls of the estate. She jerked awake in Kael's bed, her heart already racing, and found him sitting on the edge of the mattress fully dressed, his phone pressed to his ear. I don't care what you have to do, he was saying, his voice tight and controlled. Find me something I can use against Vince. Anything. We have 48 hours before they start making arrests. He ended the call and looked at Audrey. The exhaustion in his eyes said he hadn't slept at all. How bad is it? She asked. Worse than I thought. Kael stood and walked to the window, pulling back the curtain. 6 black SUVs were parked in the circular driveway, agents and windbreakers spreading out across the property. They have enough evidence to charge both of us with conspiracy, fraud, and racketeering. Vince made sure every piece of paper leads back to shell companies registered in your name. My name? Audrey's stomach dropped. How is that possible? I've never registered a company in my life. Doesn't matter. Someone forged your signature, set up accounts, made it look like you've been helping me launder money since before we even met. Kael's jaw tightened. It's brilliant, actually. Destroy my credibility, frame my wife as a criminal, and take over the family while we're both in prison. There has to be a way to prove it's fake. There is. If we can get access to Vince's private records. Kael turned to face her. But that means breaking into his office. Tonight. Audrey stared at him. That's insane. It's the only option we have. Kael, if we get caught, then we're dead anyway. He crossed the room and took her hands, his grip firm and steady. I know I've given you every reason not to trust me, but I need you to trust me now. Can you do that? Audrey searched his face, the sharp angles, the gray eyes that had gone from cold to desperate. The man who'd married her in a private chapel and was now asking her to risk everything to save them both. Yes, she said. I trust you. Relief flickered across his expression. Good, then get dressed. We have work to do. The plan was reckless and depended on too many variables Kyle couldn't control. Vince kept his private records in a safe in his home office, a penthouse apartment downtown with security cameras, armed guards, and a building manager who reported directly to him. Breaking in would require bypassing electronic locks, avoiding surveillance, and cracking a safe that probably cost more than most people's cars. Kyle had people working on the logistics. Vincent was pulling schematics of the building. Marcus was coordinating a diversion across town to draw Vince's attention away. And Rafe was somehow acquiring equipment that Audrey didn't want to think too hard about. But the most dangerous part of the plan fell to Audrey herself. You need to keep Vince distracted, Kyle said, as they sat in his office surrounded by blueprints and security footage. Long enough for me to get in and out. How am I supposed to do that? By walking into his apartment and confronting him. Audrey's pulse spiked. You want me to face him alone? Not alone. Vincent will be with you, and I'll be listening through a wire the entire time. But Vince needs to believe you're desperate enough to make a deal. What kind of deal? You give him dirt on me in exchange for immunity. Kyle's expression was unreadable. Tell him you're scared. Tell him I've been using you. Tell him whatever he wants to hear to keep him talking. And if he doesn't believe me, then you improvise. Kyle stood and pulled something from his desk drawer, a small device no bigger than a button. This is a wire. Vincent will help you place it. Everything you say, I'll hear. And if anything goes wrong, I'm pulling you out immediately. Audrey took the wire, her hands trembling slightly. What if this doesn't work? Then we disappear. Tonight. I have money hidden offshore, passports ready. We can be out of the country before sunrise. And your family? Will survive without me. Kyle's voice was flat, resigned. I'd rather be alive and exiled than dead and right. Audrey looked at him, really looked at him, and saw the exhaustion carved into every line of his face. This wasn't the cold, controlled man who'd married her 2 weeks ago. This was someone who'd been pushed to the edge and was fighting with everything he had not to fall over. We're not running, she said. Audrey, I said we're not running. She stood, squaring her shoulders. You told me to fight, so let's fight. Something shifted in Kyle's expression. Surprise, maybe, or hope. He reached out and cupped her face, his thumb brushing her cheekbone. You're terrifying, he said quietly. Good. Maybe that'll keep me alive. He kissed her, hard and desperate, like he was trying to memorize the taste of her. When he pulled back, his forehead rested against hers. If this goes wrong, it won't. But if it does, Kyle continued, his voice rough, I need you to know that marrying you was the best decision I've ever made, even if it destroys me. Audrey's throat tightened. Don't talk like that. I'm serious. You walked into my life and turned everything upside down, and I wouldn't change a single second of it. Kyle, I love you, he said, and the words landed like a confession. I don't know when it happened or how, but I do, and I needed to say it before we do this. Audrey's eyes burned. She'd spent 2 weeks waiting for Kyle to show her something real, something vulnerable, and now that he finally had, they were standing on the edge of disaster. I love you too, she whispered. Kyle kissed her again, softer this time, like he was trying to pour everything he couldn't say into the press of his mouth against hers. Then he pulled back, his expression hardening into something sharp and lethal. Let's go to war, he said. Vince's penthouse was in the financial district, all glass and steel and obscene wealth. Audrey stood in the lobby with Vincent beside her, the wire hidden beneath her blouse, her pulse hammering in her throat. Security cameras tracked their movement as they crossed to the elevator. You ready? Vincent asked quietly. No. Good. Means you're smart. He pressed the button for the top floor. Remember, you're scared, desperate, willing to betray Kyle to save yourself. Make him believe it. What if I can't? Then we're all dead. Vincent's expression softened slightly. But for what it's worth, I think you can pull this off. You've got guts, Mrs. Duval. The elevator climbed, and Audrey's stomach dropped with every floor. She thought about Kyle, somewhere in the building's maintenance tunnels with Marcus and Rafe, preparing to break into Vince's private office. She thought about everything that could go wrong, the guards discovering them, the safe being impossible to crack, Vince realizing this was a setup. She thought about prison, about losing everything, about never seeing Kyle again. The elevator doors opened onto a private vestibule. 2 guards stood flanking a set of double doors, both armed, both watching Audrey and Vincent with cold suspicion. "We're here to see Vince," Vincent said. "Does he know you're coming?" "No, but he'll want to hear what we have to say." The guard spoke into a radio, waited for confirmation, then opened the doors. "He'll see you, but you're getting searched first." They patted Vincent down and found nothing. When they searched Audrey, her heart nearly stopped, but the wire was small enough and well hidden enough that they missed it. The guard waved them through. Vince's apartment was obscene, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city, marble floors, furniture that looked like it belonged in a museum. And sitting in a leather chair near the window, a glass of whiskey in hand, was Vince himself. "Well," he said, smiling, "this is unexpected." Vincent stepped forward. "The girl wants to talk." "Does she?" Vince's eyes slid to Audrey, assessing. "And what does Mrs. Duval want to talk about?" Audrey forced herself to meet his gaze. "I want immunity." Vince's smile widened. "From what?" "From whatever charges you're planning to file against me. I know you're the one who set up those shell companies. I know you forged my signature, and I know you're using me to destroy Kyle." "Those are serious accusations." "They're the truth." Vince stood and walked toward her, slow and deliberate. "Let's say you're right. Let's say I did all those things. Why would I give you immunity?" "Because I can give you Kyle." Audrey's voice shook, but she kept going. "I can testify against him. Tell the feds everything I know about his operations. Make sure he goes to prison for the rest of his life." Vince stopped a few feet away, studying her. "You'd betray your husband?" "He's not my husband. He's my captor." Audrey let her voice crack, let the fear show through. "I didn't choose this marriage. He forced me into it, and I'm not going to prison for a man who treats me like property." "Interesting." Vince circled her slowly, like a predator evaluating prey. "And what makes you think I need your testimony?" "I already have enough evidence to bury Kyle." "But you don't have me," Audrey said. "And if I walk into federal court and tell them I was coerced, manipulated, threatened, your entire case falls apart, because I become a victim instead of an accomplice." Vince stopped circling and looked at Vincent. "Did you know about this?" "No, sir," Vincent lied smoothly. "She came to me an hour ago, said she needed to talk to you directly." Vince turned back to Audrey. "You've got balls, girl. I'll give you that." "I've got survival instincts," Audrey corrected. "And right now they're telling me that cutting a deal with you is smarter than going down with Kyle." "Smart girl." Vince walked back to his chair and sat down, gesturing for Audrey to sit across from him. "So, tell me, what exactly do you know about Kyle's operations?" Audrey sat, her heart pounding so hard she could hear it in her ears. In her mind, she heard Kyle's voice through the wire. "Keep him talking. Whatever he asks, answer. Just buy me time." "I know he's been moving money through offshore accounts," Audrey said, pulling details from conversations she'd overheard. "I know he has contracts with shipping companies that transport more than just legal cargo, and I know he pays off city officials to look the other way." "Names," Vince said. "I need names." Audrey rattled off the names Vincent had fed her before they came, real enough to sound credible, vague enough not to actually incriminate anyone who didn't deserve it. Vince listened, his expression unreadable, occasionally asking questions that Audrey answered with the right mix of fear and desperation. And all the while she watched the clock on the wall, counting down the minutes Kyle needed to get into the safe and get out. 10 minutes passed, then 15, then 20. Vince leaned back in his chair, studying her. "You know what I think?" "What?" "I think you're full of shit." Audrey's blood turned to ice. "Excuse me?" "I think Kyle sent you here to distract me." Vince's smile turned cold. "I think this entire conversation is a setup, and I think you're wearing a wire." "I'm not." Vincent, Vince said, his voice cutting through the air like a blade. Search her. Properly this time. Vincent hesitated for just a second, long enough for Audrey to see the conflict in his eyes, and then he stepped forward. I'm sorry, he murmured as he reached for her. Before Vincent could touch her, the lights went out. The entire apartment plunged into darkness. Somewhere in the building, alarms started screaming. Vince swore, and Audrey heard him moving, his chair scraping against the floor. What the hell? Fire alarm, one of the guards shouted from the doorway. We need to evacuate. It's not a fire, Vince snarled. It's KL. Lock down the building, now. Audrey didn't wait to hear the rest. She bolted for the door, her hands outstretched in the darkness, feeling her way along the wall. Someone grabbed her arm and she screamed, but it was Vincent. This way, he hissed, pulling her through the chaos. Stairs, go. They ran through the vestibule and into the stairwell, the emergency lights casting everything in sickly red. Behind them, Audrey could hear shouting, footsteps, the sound of guards mobilizing. Where's Kyle? She gasped. Already out. He triggered the alarm as a distraction. Vincent pushed her ahead of him. Move. We don't have much time. They took the stairs 3 at a time, Audrey's heels slipping on the concrete. Her lungs burned, her legs screamed. But she kept going because stopping meant getting caught, and getting caught meant everything they'd done was for nothing. They burst out of the stairwell into the underground parking garage, and Audrey saw Kyle leaning against a black SUV, a leather briefcase in his hand and blood dripping from a cut above his eyebrow. Took you long enough, he said, grinning like a maniac. Audrey ran to him and threw her arms around his neck. You're bleeding. Yeah, well, Vince's security put up more of a fight than I expected. He kissed her hard, then pulled back. Did he buy it? For a while. Then he figured it out. Doesn't matter, I got what we needed. Cale held up the briefcase. Every piece of evidence Vince has been hoarding for the past 20 years. Financial records, blackmail material, proof that he's been embezzling from the family. It's enough to bury him. Vincent slid into the driver's seat. We need to move, now. They piled into the SUV, and Vincent peeled out of the parking garage just as armed guards spilled into the space behind them. Audrey heard gunshots, sharp cracks that echoed off concrete, and then they were on the street, weaving through traffic, sirens wailing in the distance. Where are we going? Audrey asked. Somewhere safe, Kyle said. Somewhere Vince can't reach us while we figure out how to use this. They drove for 20 minutes, doubling back, switching cars twice, until they finally pulled up to a warehouse near the docks. Marcus and Rafe were already there, along with Sophia and 3 other people Audrey didn't recognize. Cale spread the contents of the briefcase across a metal table, folders, flash drives, photographs, documents covered in numbers and signatures. Sophia picked up one of the folders and flipped through it, her expression darkening with every page. Jesus Christ, she breathed. He's been skimming for years. More than skimming, Cale said. He's been running side operations without family approval, weapons deals, human trafficking, things that would get us all killed if they went public. Then we turn this over to the feds, Marcus said. No, Cale's voice was flat. We handle this internally. Kyle, if we go to the feds, everyone goes down, not just Vince. The entire family. Every business, every contact, everything Antonio built gets destroyed. Cale looked at Sophia. We call a vote. We show the family what Vince has been doing, and we let them decide his fate. Sophia hesitated, then nodded. When? Tonight, before Vince has time to regroup. That's insane, Vincent said. Half the family is still loyal to him. Then we convince them otherwise. Cale's expression hardened into something dangerous. Audrey, I need you to make a call. To who? Lucienne. Audrey's stomach dropped. Why? Because if we're going to win this, we need him on our side, and you're the only person he might actually listen to. Audrey looked at Kyle, at the exhaustion in his face, the determination in his eyes, the blood still drying on his temple, and realized he was asking her to trust him even when it hurt. Okay, she said. I'll call him. She stepped outside into the cold night air and dialed Lucian's number. He answered on the second ring. Audrey. His voice was careful, guarded. I heard about the federal thing. Are you okay? No, but I need your help. With what? Kael's calling a family vote tonight. To remove Vince, and he needs you there. Lucien was silent for a long moment. Why would I help him? Because if you don't, Vince wins. And when he takes over, he's going to kill everyone who stood with Kael, including you. You don't know that. Yes, I do. Audrey's voice cracked. Lucien, I know you hate Kael. I know you think he doesn't deserve to lead. But whatever's between you two, it's not worth dying over. What makes you think I'd die? Because Vince doesn't leave loose ends, and you're the biggest loose end there is. Lucien exhaled slowly. Where's the vote? The old cannery, midnight. I'll think about it. Lucien, I said I'll think about it. His voice softened. For what it's worth, I hope you survive this. He hung up, and Audrey stood alone in the darkness, staring at the phone, wondering if she'd just saved Lucien's life or sealed her own fate. The old cannery smelled like rust and salt water. It had been abandoned for decades, but the Duval family still used it for meetings that needed to stay off the books. Audrey stood beside Kael in the center of the massive space, surrounded by 50 people who looked like they'd rather be anywhere else. Vince stood across from them, flanked by his own guards, his expression carved from stone. The rest of the family filled in the space between elders, enforcers, people whose loyalty could go either way depending on who made the better argument. Sophia stepped forward, acting as mediator. We're here because Kael has brought evidence against Vince. Serious evidence. Before we take a vote, everyone needs to see what we're dealing with. Kael gestured to Marcus, who set up a laptop connected to a projector. Images flashed across the warehouse wall. Bank statements, shipping manifests, photographs of Vince meeting with people no one in the family should ever deal with. For the past 10 years, Kael said, his voice echoing off metal walls, Vince has been stealing from this family, running operations we never approved, putting all of us at risk for his own profit. That's a lie, Vince said calmly. Is it? Kael pulled up a document, a transfer record showing millions of dollars moving through offshore accounts registered to shell companies. This is your signature, Uncle, on every page, forged. Then explain the photographs. Another image flashed, Vince shaking hands with a known arms dealer. Explain the recordings. Kael played an audio clip of Vince negotiating a weapons deal that violated every treaty the family had ever signed. The room erupted in whispers. People exchanged glances, shifting uncomfortably. Audrey could feel the tide turning. This is all fabricated, Vince said, but his voice had lost its edge. Kael's desperate. He married a stranger to try to secure his position, and when that didn't work, he manufactured evidence to destroy me. I didn't manufacture anything, Kael said. I found it in your safe, the one in your penthouse, the one you thought no one could access. Vince's expression finally cracked, just for a second, just long enough for everyone to see the rage underneath. You broke into my home. I did what I had to do to protect this family. You broke the law. So did you. Kael stepped forward. The difference is, I did it to save us. You did it to line your pockets. Vince moved so fast no one had time to react. He pulled a gun from his jacket and aimed it directly at Kael's chest. You arrogant little shit, Vince snarled. You think you can waltz in here and destroy everything I've built? Audrey's heart stopped. Around them, guns appeared. Vince's men drawing on Kael's men drawing on Vince's. Everyone caught in a standoff that could explode into violence with one wrong move. Put the gun down, Vince, Sophia said, her voice steady. No. Vince's hand didn't waver. I've spent 30 years cleaning up Antonio's messes. 30 years doing the dirty work no one else wanted to touch. And this is how you repay me? By believing some kid who doesn't know the first thing about running this family? I know enough not to steal from it, Kael said. You don't know anything. Vince's finger tightened on the trigger. And you're about to learn what happens when you challenge me. Before anyone could move, Lucien walked through the warehouse doors. Everyone turned. Every gun stayed exactly where it was. And Lucien stopped in the center of the space, looking at Vince, then at Kael, his expression unreadable. Lucien, Vince said, relief flooding his voice. Thank God. Help me deal with this. Lucien was silent for a long, terrible moment. Then he looked at Kael. Is it true? Lucien asked. Everything you just showed us? Yes. And you can prove it? I can prove all of it. Lucien's jaw tightened. He looked at Vince, and something shifted in his expression, something that looked almost like pity. Lower the gun, Uncle, Lucien said quietly. What? I said lower the gun. Lucien stepped between Vince and Kael, forcing Vince to either shoot through him or back down. This is over. You don't know what you're doing. Yes, I do. Lucien's voice was steady, final. I'm choosing my brother over you. The warehouse went silent. Vince stared at Lucien like he'd been struck. Then his face twisted into something ugly and desperate. You're making a mistake, Vince said. Maybe. Lucien looked back at Kael, and for the first time since Audrey had met him, she saw something real in his eyes. Not rivalry, not resentment, but something like respect. But it's my mistake to make. Vince lowered the gun. Sophia stepped forward. All in favor of removing Vince from his position and exiling him from the family? Hands went up around the warehouse. Not everyone. Some of Vince's loyalists stayed silent, but enough. More than enough. It's decided, Sophia said. Vince, you have 24 hours to leave Providence. If you're still here after that, you're no longer under family protection. Vince looked at the faces around him. People he'd known for decades. People he'd bled with. People who were now turning their backs on him. He holstered his gun and walked toward the exit, his footsteps echoing in the silence. At the door, he stopped and looked back at Kael. This isn't over, he said. Yes, Kael said quietly. It is. Vince left, and the warehouse exhaled. Audrey's legs nearly gave out, but Kael caught her, his arm wrapping around her waist. It's over, he murmured into her hair. It's finally over. But as the family began to disperse, Lucien walked over to them, his expression hard. We need to talk, Lucien said to Kael. Alone. Anything you have to say, you can say in front of Audrey. Lucien glanced at her, then back at Kael. Fine. I helped you tonight because it was the right thing to do. But don't think for a second that this changes anything between us. I don't. Good. Lucien's jaw tightened. Because I meant what I said before. You don't deserve her, and one day she's going to figure that out. He walked away before either of them could respond. Audrey looked up at Kael. He's wrong, you know. About what? About you not deserving me. She touched his face, her thumb brushing the cut above his eyebrow. We deserve each other. The good and the bad. Kael pulled her close, his forehead resting against hers. I don't know what I did to deserve you walking into that funeral. You gave me a way out when I needed it most, and then you fought like hell to keep me. I'll keep fighting, Kael said, for as long as you'll let me. Then I guess you're stuck with me. They stood like that, wrapped in each other, surrounded by the wreckage of a war they'd somehow survived. And for the first time since this nightmare had started, Audrey let herself believe they might actually make it. But as they walked out of the cannery into the cold night air, Audrey saw Damian Mercer leaning against a car across the street, watching them with an expression that made her blood run cold. He smiled, slow, dangerous, and got into his car. And Audrey realized with sudden, crushing certainty that Vince wasn't the only enemy they had to worry about. Damian's smile stayed with Audrey long after his car disappeared into the night. She stood on the sidewalk outside the cannery, the cold wind cutting through her jacket, and felt something coil tight in her chest. Not fear exactly, but the bone-deep certainty that this wasn't over yet. What is it? Kael asked, following her gaze. Damian was here, watching us. Kael's expression darkened. Did he say anything? No, he just smiled, like he knows something we don't. Kael pulled out his phone and dialed Vincent. I want eyes on Damian Mercer, 24/7, and if he so much as breathes in Audrey's direction, I want to know about it. He hung up and turned back to her. Let's get you home. But home felt less safe than it had an hour ago. They drove back to the estate in tense silence, Kael's hand tight around hers, both of them hyper-aware that removing Vince didn't mean the danger was gone. It just meant the enemy had changed shape. They spent the next 3 days in a kind of limbo. The federal investigation stalled when Kael's lawyers produced evidence that the shell companies had been registered fraudulently. with forged signatures and fabricated records that tied back to Vince's operation. The agents backed off, but they didn't disappear. Just moved their focus to Vince, who'd vanished somewhere into the wind the moment he left Providence. Audrey thought that would be the end of it, that they'd survived the worst and could finally start building something real. She should have known better. The call came at 2 in the morning. Kael answered on the first ring, and Audrey watched the color drain from his face as he listened. "When?" he asked, his voice tight. "How bad?" A pause. "I'll be there in 20 minutes. He hung up and looked at Audrey, and the devastation in his eyes made her stomach drop. "What happened?" "It's Lucien." Kael's voice was hollow. "He's been shot." They made it to the hospital in 15 minutes, Kael driving like a man possessed, running red lights and weaving through empty streets. Audrey didn't ask questions. She just held on and tried not to think about the look on Kael's face, the terror, the guilt, the raw panic of someone who'd spent years pushing his brother away and was now terrified he'd never get the chance to pull him back. The hospital was chaos. Armed security guards filled the emergency room entrance, Vincent coordinating with local police, Sophia pacing near the doors with her phone pressed to her ear. When she saw Kael, relief and grief warred on her face. "He's in surgery," Sophia said. 2 bullets, one in the shoulder, one in the chest. "They don't know if he's going to make it." "What happened?" Kael asked. "He was leaving a bar downtown. Someone was waiting for him in the parking lot." Sophia's voice cracked. "They found him 20 minutes later. If the bartender hadn't heard the shots..." "Who did this?" Kael's voice was deadly quiet. "We don't know yet. Vincent's pulling surveillance footage, but..." "It was Damien," Audrey said. Everyone turned to look at her. "It had to be. He was watching us outside the cannery. He knew Lucien helped you, and he's working with Vince." "You don't know that," Sophia said carefully. "Yes, I do." Audrey looked at Kael. "Damien told us he wanted immunity in exchange for information, but he never said he was done with Vince. What if he's been playing both sides, feeding Vince information, waiting to see who won?" Kael's jaw tightened. "Vincent, find Damien Mercer. Now." Vincent disappeared, phone already at his ear. Kael sank into one of the waiting room chairs and dropped his head into his hands. Audrey sat beside him, her hand on his back, feeling the tension vibrating through him. "This is my fault," Kael said quietly. "No, it's not. I pushed him away. I made him feel like he didn't matter, and now..." His voice broke. "If he dies thinking I hate him..." "He doesn't think that." Audrey forced Kael to look at her. "Lucien knows you, better than anyone. And whatever's between you two, he knows it's not hate. How can you be sure?" "Because he came to the cannery. He stood between you and Vince even though it put a target on his back. That's not something you do for someone you think hates you." Kael's eyes were red-rimmed, exhausted. "What if I don't get the chance to tell him? Then we wait, and we hope. And when he wakes up, you tell him everything you should have said years ago." They waited for 6 hours. Audrey brought coffee no one drank. Sophia made phone calls to family members, her voice steady even though her hands shook. Vincent returned with news that Damien had disappeared. His apartment was empty, his car abandoned at the airport, no trace of where he'd gone. And Kael sat in that waiting room chair like a statue, staring at the operating room doors, waiting for news that would either save him or destroy him. Finally, a surgeon emerged, still in scrubs, exhaustion carved into every line of her face. "He's alive," she said, and the room exhaled as one. "The surgery went well. We removed both bullets, repaired the damage. He's stable, but the next 48 hours are critical. If he makes it through that, his chances are good." "Can I see him?" Kael asked. "Family only, and only for a few minutes." "I'm his brother." The surgeon nodded and led Kael through the doors. Audrey started to follow, but Sophia caught her arm. "Let him go alone," Sophia said gently. "This is something he needs to do." So Audrey waited, her chest tight with worry, and tried not to think about how close they'd come to losing someone who mattered. 20 minutes later, Kael emerged. His eyes were red, his face pale, but something in his expression had softened. "He's going to be okay," Kael said. "He woke up for a few seconds, told me I looked like hell." He laughed, a broken, relieved sound. "Then he told me to stop being an idiot and go take care of my wife." Audrey's throat tightened. Did you tell him? Tell him what? That you love him, that he matters. Cale nodded slowly. I did. And he told me he already knew, that he'd always known. He was just waiting for me to stop being too stubborn to say it out loud. Sounds like Lucien. Yeah. Cale pulled Audrey into his arms, holding her so tight she could barely breathe. I almost lost him. And it would have been because I was too scared to let him see that I cared. But you didn't lose him, Audrey said. He's still here, and now you get the chance to fix things. Cale pulled back, his hands framing her face. I don't want to waste time anymore. Not with him, not with you, not with anyone. Then don't. He kissed her, soft and desperate, and full of all the things he was terrible at saying out loud. When they pulled apart, Sophia was watching them with a small, sad smile. You two go home, Sophia said. Get some rest. I'll stay here with Lucien. You sure? I'm sure. And Cale? Sophia's expression turned serious. Find whoever did this, and make sure they never get the chance to hurt this family again. Cale's eyes went cold. I will. They spent the next 2 days hunting Damien. Vincent tracked his credit cards, his phone records, every digital footprint he'd left behind. Marcus put out word on the street, cash rewards for anyone who'd seen him, threats for anyone hiding him. And Cale called in favors from people Audrey didn't want to think too hard about. On the 3rd day, they found him. He was holed up in a motel 40 miles outside Providence, using a fake name driving a rental car. Vincent's team surrounded the building, and Cale brought Audrey with him because she'd insisted, because this was her fight too, because Damien had used her, manipulated her, tried to destroy everything she'd built. They kicked in the motel room door at dawn. Damien was sitting on the bed, fully dressed like he'd been expecting them, a gun on the nightstand within easy reach. Don't, Cale said, his own gun already trained on Damien's chest. You won't make it. Damien's hand stayed visible, palms up. I wasn't going to. Why Lucien? Cale asked. What did he ever do to you? Nothing. But Vince paid me to send a message. Damien's eyes slid to Audrey. That no one in your family is safe. That removing him from Providence doesn't mean he's gone. Where is he? Cale demanded. I don't know. He didn't tell me. Just paid me half up front, promised the rest when I finished the job. You shot my brother for money? I shot your brother because I'm good at what I do, and because Audrey chose you over me. Damien's expression twisted into something ugly. You want to know the truth? I'm glad I did it. Glad I made you hurt the way you made me hurt. Audrey stepped forward and Cale tried to stop her, but she shook him off. She walked right up to Damien, close enough to see the spite in his eyes, and looked at him like he was nothing. You didn't make him hurt, she said quietly. You just proved that I made the right choice leaving you. Audrey. Oh, shut up. I'm not done. She leaned closer, her voice dropping into something cold and lethal. You spent 2 years trying to control me, 2 years making me feel small, invisible, worthless. And the second I stood up for myself, you couldn't handle it. So you teamed up with a man who tried to destroy the only family I have left. Not because you loved me, but because you couldn't stand the idea that I was happier without you. You're not happy, Damien said, but his voice shook. You're trapped, just in a prettier cage. No, Audrey straightened. I'm free. And that terrifies you, because if I can walk away from you and survive, it means you never had the power you thought you did. Damien stared at her, and for the first time since she'd known him, she saw something crack in his expression. Not remorse, but the realization that he'd lost. Completely. Irrevocably. Vincent, Cale said. Take him. Vincent and 2 other men hauled Damien to his feet. As they dragged him toward the door, Damien looked back at Audrey one last time. I loved you, he said. No, Audrey said. You loved controlling me. There's a difference. They took him away, and Audrey stood in that dingy motel room feeling lighter than she had in years. Cale walked over and wrapped his arms around her from behind, his chin resting on her shoulder. You're terrifying when you're angry, he murmured. Good. Maybe people will stop underestimating me. I never underestimated you. I just didn't realize how strong you were until you started showing me. Audrey turned in his arms, looking up at him. What happens to Damien now? He goes to the feds. We turn over everything we have on him working with Vince. He'll spend the next 20 years in prison. And Vince? Will spend the rest of his life looking over his shoulder. Cale's expression hardened. He's exiled, broke, and burned every bridge he ever had. If he's smart, he'll disappear. If he's not, someone will find him eventually. And us? We rebuild. Cale touched her face, his thumb brushing her cheekbone. We take everything broken and make it better, starting with this family. 3 months later, Audrey stood in front of a crowd of journalists and city officials, her hands resting on a podium with the Duvall name engraved on the front, and tried not to let her nerves show. 6 weeks ago, she said, her voice steady, we announced the creation of the Evelyn Duvall Maternal Care Foundation. Today, I'm proud to officially open our first medical center. She gestured to the building behind her, a renovated clinic in one of Providence's poorest neighborhoods, equipped with state-of-the-art medical equipment, staffed by doctors who'd agreed to work on sliding-scale fees. It had cost millions to build. It would cost millions more to run. But when Audrey had proposed the idea to Kyle, he'd said yes without hesitation. This foundation exists because Kyle Duvall's mother, Evelyn, died during childbirth, Audrey continued. She deserved better care, better access, better chances. And we're building this to make sure no other woman dies because she couldn't afford the help she needed. The crowd applauded, cameras flashed, and Kyle stood at the edge of the gathering, watching her with an expression that made her chest ache. Pride, love, something too big to name. After the speeches ended and the crowd dispersed, Audrey found Kyle waiting by the car. You were incredible, he said. I was terrified. Didn't show. He pulled her close, his hand settling on her waist. You know what I was thinking while you were up there? What? That the girl who ran into a funeral in a ruined wedding dress just changed this city, and she did it by refusing to stay small. Audrey's eyes burned. I couldn't have done any of this without you. Yes, you could have. You just needed someone to stop standing in your way. They drove back to the estate, where Lucien was waiting on the front steps, his arms still in a sling but his smile sharp as ever. Nice speech, Lucien said as they approached. You watched? Streamed it on my phone. Very inspiring. Almost made me believe the Duvall name could mean something other than fear and backroom deals. That's the point, Kyle said. Lucien's smile softened. I know. He looked at Audrey. For what it's worth, I'm glad he married you. You're good for him, even if I don't like admitting it. I'll take that as a compliment. You should. I don't give many. Lucien pushed off the steps with a wince. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have physical therapy in an hour, and my doctor threatened to murder me if I'm late again. He walked inside, and Audrey looked at Kyle. You two are doing better. We're trying. It's not perfect, but it's better than it was. That's all you can ask for. They walked through the estate gardens, the late afternoon sun painting everything gold. Audrey's hand found Kyle's, their fingers lacing together like they'd done it 1,000 times. I have something to tell you, Audrey said. Kyle stopped walking, his expression cautious. What? Audrey took a breath, her heart hammering. She'd been trying to find the right moment for 3 days, but there was no perfect time for this. So she just said it. I'm pregnant. Kale went completely still. His eyes widened, his mouth opened, but no sound came out. For a terrible moment, Audrey thought he might pass out. Kale? You're... His voice cracked. How long have you known? 2 weeks. I wanted to be sure before I told you. Kale's hands came up to frame her face, and Audrey saw tears in his eyes. Actual tears streaming down his cheeks like he didn't know how to stop them. Are you okay? He asked, his voice shaking. Are you healthy? Does the doctor... I'm fine, the baby's fine, everything's fine. My mother died, Kyle said, the words tumbling out in a rush. She died having Lucien, and I can't lose you, Ahio. You won't. Audrey took his hands and pressed them against her stomach, which was still flat, but wouldn't be for much longer. Medicine's different now. I'll have the best care, and I'm not going anywhere. Promise me. I promise. Kyle pulled her into his arms and held her so tight she could feel his heart hammering against her ribs. When he finally pulled back, he was smiling through tears. We're having a baby, he said, like he couldn't quite believe it. "We're having a baby. I don't know how to do this." "Neither do I, but we'll figure it out." Audrey touched his face, just like we figured out everything else. Kael kissed her, soft and reverent, like she was something precious he was afraid to break. And Audrey kissed him back, tasting salt from his tears, feeling the way his hands trembled against her waist. They had 6 months to prepare. 6 months of doctor's appointments and nursery planning, and Kael hovering like a bodyguard every time Audrey so much as sneezed. Lucien recovered fully and took on more responsibilities in the family business, proving to everyone that he was more than just Kael's rival. Sophia helped Audrey navigate the complexities of running a foundation, teaching her how to work the political machinery of Providence without losing herself in it. And slowly, painfully, the Duval name started to mean something different, not just fear, not just power, but opportunity, change, a family trying to be better than the sum of its worst parts. The baby came on a cold January morning, 3 weeks early, and screaming loud enough to wake the entire hospital wing. Audrey was exhausted, terrified, in more pain than she'd ever imagined possible. But when the nurses placed her daughter in her arms, tiny, perfect, impossibly alive, everything else fell away. Kael stood beside the bed, staring at his daughter like she'd hung the moon, his hand trembling as he touched her impossibly small fingers. "She's perfect," he whispered. "She's ours," Audrey said, her voice thick with tears. They named her Evelyn. Not because they thought it would erase the past, but because they wanted to honor the woman who'd given Kael life, the woman who deserved to be remembered as more than just a tragedy. 2 years later, Audrey stood on the balcony of the Duval estate, watching the sun set over the ocean, and felt arms wrap around her waist from behind. "She's finally asleep," Kael murmured into her hair. "It only took 3 stories and a song. She's got your stubbornness. And your fire." Kael's hand slid over her stomach, where a second heartbeat was growing. "Think this one will be easier?" "Absolutely not." Kael laughed, a real laugh, warm and unguarded in a way that still surprised her sometimes. "Good. I'd be bored if things were easy." They stood like that, wrapped in each other, while the sky turned from gold to pink to purple. The foundation had opened 2 more clinics. The Duval business was cleaner than it had been in decades. Lucien was talking about running for city council, which would have been unthinkable 2 years ago. And Audrey, the girl who'd run barefoot through the rain trying to escape one life, had somehow built an entirely new one. "Do you ever think about that night?" Audrey asked. "The funeral?" "Every day." "Do you regret it?" Kyle turned her in his arms, his gray eyes soft in the fading light. "Marrying you was the most reckless thing I've ever done. It was impulsive, dangerous, probably insane." "That's not an answer." "No," Kyle said, his voice steady and certain. "I don't regret a single second. You walked into my life and turned everything upside down. And I wouldn't change any of it." Audrey smiled, rising on her toes to kiss him. "Good, because you're stuck with me. Forever. Forever." Behind them, through the open balcony doors, they heard Evelyn crying, awake again, demanding attention in the way only a 2-year-old could. Kael groaned, but he was smiling as he headed inside. "I'll get her," he said. "You rest." Audrey watched him go, this man who'd once seemed cold and untouchable, now holding their daughter like she was made of glass, singing off-key lullabies that made Evelyn giggle instead of sleep. She thought about the girl she'd been 2 years ago, desperate, lost, convinced she deserved whatever scraps of love people were willing to give her. And she thought about the woman she'd become, someone who demanded more, fought harder, refused to accept anything less than the life she wanted. The journey hadn't been easy. It had been brutal, terrifying, full of moments where she'd been convinced it would all fall apart. But standing here now, watching the family she'd built from the wreckage of 2 broken lives, Audrey realized something important. She'd stopped running. Not because she'd found a cage that was comfortable enough to accept, but because she'd finally found a place worth staying for, a place worth fighting for, a place that felt, for the first time in her life, like home. And when Kael returned with Evelyn in his arms and sat beside her on the balcony, their daughter babbling nonsense between them, Audrey felt something settle deep in her chest. Peace. Not the absence of struggle, but the presence of something stronger than fear. Love. Family. A future built on choice instead of desperation. The runaway bride who'd crashed a funeral in a storm had finally stopped running, and the life she'd found was better than any escape she could have imagined.